All right, guys. So for this problem, we're gonna be writing equations with variables based on a situation. So the first question says a pizza shop sells pizzas that are 8 inches or larger, right? So it says an 8 inch cheese pizza costs $6. Says each additional inch costs 250, and each additional topping costs 50 cents. So it says write an equation that represents the cost of the pizza, and it says be sure to specify what the variables represent in this case. So in this case, again, they're saying write an equation that represents the cost of the pizza. So we know that the equation is gonna represent the cost. So it'll be C. We use C is equal to, well, in this case, they told us that a 8 inch cheese pizza, right, costs $6. But they could add additional inches, right? And said that each one of them costs how much? In this case, it said 250, right? So 250 for each additional cheese. Each additional inch. And then the last thing that they could also ask for in this pizza shop, right, is that they could ask for additional toppings in this case, right? So again, it's saying that each one of them in this case costs 50 cents, right? So in this case, then again, the equation will represent the cost. Well, what the cost of just an 8 inch pizza, right? If somebody just says, "Hey, I want a 8 inch cheese pizza," well, it will cost them $6 in this case, right? And that would be it at that point, right? But what if somebody comes in and says, "Hey, I actually don't want it to be 8 inch. I want it to be larger," right? So in this case, well, but that costs more or less. Well, it will cost more, right? They're asking for a larger pizza. So in this case, how much would that cost? Well, it would cost 250 for each additional inch. So I could just say, well, 250 times I, right? So if I want 2 extra inches, then 250 times 2. If I wanted 4 more inches, then 250 times 4, right? And then add the $6 of the base pizza, find the cost. However, they could also ask for additional toppings, though, right? So then that means that that could actually be an additional cost. So in this case, we could add. How much would they charge for that? Well, they would charge 50 cents. Is that a flat fee? No, it's actually per each topping, right? So we could say in this case times t, and that would represent the equation of in this case of this the cost of the pizza, right? Well, the last thing is to specify the variables. Well, in this case, C, right, represents the cost of the pizza. In this case, the I represents the number of additional inches, right? Because if they want 250 times 1. If they want 10 more, just times 250, right, each time. And then T in this case is the number of additional toppings, right? So that's that. And then now looking at the second question, we could go a little faster now that we saw that, right? So in this case, it says a bakery sells cakes that are one layer. So it says a one layer cake with one flavor costs $20. It says each additional layer, right, costs $12, and each additional flavor costs $5. So it says write an equation that represents the cost of the cake. Be sure to specify the variables. Well, again, the equation will be C is equal to, says the cost. Well, if they get a one layer cake, right, one layer, then one flavor, right? That would be just $20, right? But if they wanted an additional layer, right, there will be an extra cost, right, each. So there'll be $12 for each additional layer. And then the other thing that they could customize is that they could add additional flavors as well, right? So in this case, each of them, right, there will be a cost of, in this case, for each flavor, an extra $5. So then that means we would have, if they just buy a regular cake, $20. If they want additional layers, that would be an extra cost. So $12 per layer. So you could say 12 times L, right, for layer. And then if we wanted additional flavors, then it would be at $5. But in this case, times each flavor, right? So this case, C will be the cost of the cake. L will be the number of additional layers. It will be the number of additional flavors. And that would be it, right? This would be the equation for this specific cake in this case. Hope that helped. Definitely expect something like this on a quiz or on a test.